Give it a few seconds to boot. Okay, I think we're live on the internet. Okay, welcome everyone to another edition of Subvisual Live Talks. If you haven't, please subscribe to any of our channels that you can see here below. Today, I'm gonna move this fairly quickly. Welcome, Cassidy. We have Cassidy Williams join us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No problem. So Cassidy, for everyone that doesn't know you, for all the thousands of people that are here, not because of you, just kidding. Um, can you give a quick overview? We'll get into more detail, but a quick overview of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Cassidy. You'll find me Cassidy most places on the internet. And I'm a principal developer experience engineer at Netlify. And so I typically write React both on the job and for fun. And I'm relatively known for making jokes on the internet as well. So very quick overview.
Correct. Okay, we'll try to dig deeper into all of those things. But before that, my usually my first question here is how did you get started in tech? What was the driver that made you get started into this?
I started it when I was pretty young, when I was about 13 years old, and I was walking home from school, and I heard someone say, "Check out my website." And from there, I was like, "Wait, you can have one of those?" And I went to start looking up how to make websites from there, and it just kind of hooked me from there. I figured out how HTML and CSS and everything worked, and just went from there trying to learn stuff. And then in high school, I took a Java class, and then I went into college to study computer science. And yeah, that's how I got into it.
Cool.
And yeah, I really like it, and it's something that I if I didn't have that random interaction, I don't know if I would have been on it, but I'm happy that I am.
Cool. Yeah, I was gonna ask if you did go to college for a computer science degree because I know it's
Mhm.
a path not everyone takes, and particularly someone that like at a young age you said you realized you wanted to do something on the web, or it just triggered you to learn programming and you wanted to know more, because I'm assuming um, if you knew that like web was the thing, did you consider not going to college and just getting straight into it?
I didn't know anything about this world.
Okay.
Like my parents aren't very technical. Like nobody in my family was really in tech. My younger sister is now,
Hmm.
but yeah, I didn't even know that there was other coding outside of web development. Like I truly didn't get that until I did take Java, and I was like, oh, that's for stuff that's not for web stuff. But like my world was not that open.
Hmm.
I didn't know that you could just not get a degree for it. This was a while ago,
Hmm.
and so there just weren't nearly as many resources as there are now
Yeah.
for people to learn this kind of stuff. And so yeah, if I were to look up like how to learn how to code now, there are so many resources where I could learn, oh, this is how I do web stuff, this is how I do phone apps, this is how I do this is how I do that. But when I was learning, smartphones weren't a thing yet, and I was sharing a cell phone with my mom still. Like
Yeah.
it was old enough ago that I just didn't know that that was an option to do anything
No, that definitely
otherwise.
that totally resonates with me. I went to college for computer science, like having no idea what I was getting into, having never
Right.
coded before. So yeah, makes total sense. And so from then, from your college days, what do you say then is the path to where you are now? So you said you had no real idea what you're getting into at the time, and just figuring things out. Then what led you to actually choose? Was that like a constant like choice in your mind of I want to build websites? Was that a thing?
It was, I wanted to build stuff for people to enjoy. Like that was really the high level thing. I loved the idea that I could build something out of seemingly nothing and share it with people, and they could just go to a website, or they could go to something that I tell them to download and use it.
Mm.
And so I loved that concept. And it didn't necessarily, like, once I got into college, I started to know a little bit more about the industry. And so I had a few internships at various places, and tried to meet as many people as I could and understand what part of the industry I wanted to be in. And by the time I hit my last year of college, I realized, okay, I've had these sorts of internships. I want to be able to have a role where, yes, I code because I like coding, but I wanted to also be able to interact with developers and speak more. By the time I had gotten to my final year, I was doing a lot of public speaking for other students, and I was leading certain clubs, and I was getting pretty involved just in my little community, and I really wanted to continue that kind of work. And so that kind of led me into the world of developer relations, advocacy, evangelism, whatever words your company might pick. And so when I graduated, I interviewed at tons and tons of places, and I ended up going to a company called Venmo, where in the United States it's a payments app. It's not outside of the United States, but it lets you pay your friends pretty easily. And I was their first developer evangelist. I was doing kind of a half and half job of developer relations and half of engineering. And it was great. I got to practice my public speaking skills, and I probably said to yes to too many events. I just wanted to get get the word out there and figure out what part of speaking do I really like. Meanwhile, I was coding. I kind of burnt out a lot actually because I was doing a little too much of everything, but it taught me a lot to figure out what I liked to do. And so I was at Venmo for a while, and it was actually bought by PayPal. Um, and then when it was bought by PayPal, they kind of left us alone for a little while, but then after a while, they started to kind of consume us a little bit more. And a lot of the projects I was working on were about to either be cut or absorbed. And so I was kind of just like, I don't really like this. I might head out in case they cut my job. And so I left to go to an AI startup called Clarify. And that startup, it was for image recognition, and it's a really cool place. They still exist. And I was a pretty early employee there. I think I was 17 or 18. And I was going to lead their developer relations efforts in addition to engineering again. And so I was working. My sister actually worked there too, and some friends of mine worked there. And so I was working on the actual apps and stuff itself, but I was also going out and speaking at events, writing blog posts, and kind of just trying to get the word out about our APIs. And it was a really fun job. But I didn't really like living in New York City, and so I decided to leave New York City and move off to Seattle. And when I moved off to Seattle, I started at a company called L4, and it was a creative agency, and I really loved working there. And then they were bought. And so I loved L4, but because they were bought, things started getting cut, stuff started getting absorbed, and kind of the exact same thing happened. I realized I better get out of Dodge before they cut me. And so from there, I went to work at Amazon. And Amazon was a very good learning experience. I was working on Alexa, and my big fancy title was head of developer voice programs. And so I was kind of doing developer relations, but also working on dev work in house. Their nickname for me was Developer Zero, and so I would basically take a new feature that was going to be a part of the Alexa devices, build something with it, show product. Okay, here's the things that I enjoyed about it, what I didn't enjoy about it. You should fix it. And then once it was released, I would show developers how to use it. And so I was kind of a middleman between developers and the product teams. And I learned very quickly that I was not a big company person. I was not a huge fan of the culture of the really large company at Amazon. And so I didn't stay there too long, and I ended up leaving to go work at CodePen after that. And CodePen was a blast, and it was my first remote job too. And I was at CodePen and working on features, and this was a purely just developer role. I wasn't doing any developer relations or anything. And so it was just a true engineering role. And as I was working on it, it was great. I loved working on CodePen, but I was starting to miss that developer interaction, doing those kinds of developer relations roles. And so after kind of talking with the team there, I realized that as much as I like engineering, I like interacting with developers more and figuring out how I can code and interact with them. And so I went from CodePen to a company called React Training. And that was a purely talking with developers role. And I was teaching React workshops all over the world, actually. My last workshop was actually in Ireland at the very beginning of March, right before quarantine hit. And so I was traveling pretty regularly all over the country in the United States and a few places elsewhere, just speaking very, very regularly, giving these workshops, and then in between teaching workshops, I was working on curriculum and building apps and stuff to teach people with. And it was a great job, but sadly, nobody wanted to hire trainers in a quarantine and in a pandemic. And I remember I was actually supposed to teach in Spain 2 weeks after my Ireland workshop, and that was when just everything was shut down and we just ran out of business and we weren't able to even do virtual workshops or anything. So they had to lay off all of the staff. And from there, uh, silver lining of all of it, I interviewed a bunch and I ended up working at Netlify where I am now. And Netlify, I'm a principal developer experience engineer. And so it's another kind of engineering role with a lot of DevRel in it. And I get to interact with developers regularly and write demos and blog posts and still code a bunch too. And that's how I got to where I am today.
Awesome. That's a lot of stuff. Um,
It's a lot of stuff.
and I have a couple questions there. So as you mentioned, you're now in Seattle. I don't know if
Mhm.
you're originally from around the area or if that.
Yeah, I'm from Chicago.
Okay. Because I was gonna, yeah, my question was around if you think being in Seattle or New York, you said you were in those bigger hubs, impacts the fact that you get into companies, they get bought, but then you change company, and then like something happens and you change company. And do you think that's a symptom of being in big tech hubs, even though New York is not a huge tech hub, but still, do you think that's a symptom of that?
I think so. I There are very few tech people I know in these individual hubs that stay at a job for more than 2 or 3 years
Right.
at the most. It's a pretty common thing, and I think it's something that's very common in tech in general, but particularly in those kinds of tech hubs. And so now, especially because I've been working remotely ever since I joined CodePen and through now, because Netlify is a remote company as well. I'll be curious to see what happens. I'm kind of just saying, hoping like, hey, hopefully, if Netlify gets bought, great, but hopefully I can stick around at this one a little bit longer, because it's a really fun job, and I love interacting with developers and everything. But it's a very fickle industry, and so sometimes things get bought, and sometimes things change, and cultures change, and that's when you have to move on.
Cool. And but do you? I don't know. I'm just thinking. Do you think is just too many opportunities? Is that a problem there? Like there's just so much stuff.
I don't think there's such thing as too many opportunities because there are a
Right.
lot of people who would like jobs right now, for sure. I think there are a lot though, where it's to the point where every developer I know who has worked at a company for more than 6 months gets recruiters headhunting
Hmm.
them, and having a tenure at a company just isn't as important anymore. And people, I think, once would have held that against you if you left for whatever reason at a given company, but that's just not as common anymore.
And with now with the transition to more remote, you as you said, you're working remotely for a while, and now with this whole pandemic thing, a lot of companies have been forced to work remotely, and some of them understanding that it actually does work. Um, do you think that that sort of recruitment will grow out of these tech hubs into other places within the US or even abroad?
I think so. And I think that's a really good thing too, because people who do live in these tech hubs, the rents are getting astronomical, and it's frustrating because you want to live in a certain area that would have been affordable even 5 years ago, and now it's just not. And when you look at cities like New York and San Francisco and Seattle and other tech hubs, there's problems with really expensive housing and homelessness and all the very big disparity between tech workers and everybody else. And it's it's not great. It's great for the city to be able to grow and expand in that kind of way, but it's not great for everybody in the city. And so I am excited to see how remote work grows and how people aren't compelled to live very specifically in these hubs anymore, how they can kind of expand out to other perfectly great cities that just don't have an office
Right.
there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, agree. Another thing you mentioned there, or is that you interviewed a lot, right, with for a bunch of
Yeah.
companies in different time periods. And something that I noticed in your newsletter, that you have, I think you can find it on your website, right? You can
Mhm.
subscribe there. But you do have an interview question of the week, or something of the
Yeah.
sorts. Um, my question there is not necessarily about the interview questions specifically, but more in general about the interview processes of most of the companies right now, and what do you think about them? Do you think they make sense, and do they align with what you expect?
I think tech hiring is very broken in general. Like the person who solves it and figures it will be a very rich person because I I think interviewing is a skill that's completely separate from engineering. Like engineering helps, but it's a completely separate skill because you're selling yourself as an engineer rather than engineering. You might be given some kind of code challenge or some kind of whiteboarding technical thing, but it's all about communicating and selling that you know how to do that thing very well. And so for example, in my newsletter, I put those questions there so people can kind of keep up their chops, so I can keep up my chops just in case, answering those kinds of questions. But also, it's so much more than the technical questions themselves. It's how you communicate them. There are so many times where I've talked to someone where they might solve a whiteboarding question perfectly, but they don't talk about it properly. Like for example, when I'm walking into an interview with some big tech company, they give me some question. Before writing anything on the whiteboard, I'm talking with them saying, okay, here's how I'm going to solve it. I talk them through my entire answer. Once I've like gotten the nod and they've said, okay, yeah, that makes sense. As I've talked with them, that's when I start to actually write it on the whiteboard. And that's something that everybody does. Sometimes people will just get the question, say, okay, and then write the code on the board, but don't communicate it at all. And then that ends up being a red flag, and you haven't made a connection with the interviewer. There's so many little things that I think could be improved. And it really depends from large companies and small companies too, because large companies, they tend to do gra- uh, binary search trees and much more data structures and algorithms focused types of questions. Meanwhile, smaller companies, they tend to focus more on very practical things like, hey, if you were given this task, how would you solve it? That sort of thing. And so the disparity between them is great and the differences between them is huge. And so it's when you're practicing for interviewing, it is difficult because you have to figure out what type of company is this. Are they going to be a data structures and algorithms type of
Hmm.
company or a more practical experience type of company? Are they going to be asking very technical like quiz questions, or are they going to just be asking about my experience? There's a very wide variety, and the fact that you have to be prepared for all of it is such a pain. And so many people I know stay in their tech jobs purely because they don't feel like interviewing because it's such a
Yeah.
hassle.
Why do you think that is in terms of the like big disparity between bigger and smaller companies? Having worked as you said, like an Amazon or smaller companies where you get in early, why do you think there's such a big disparity?
So I think first of all, big companies they have a lot of old school thinking, and so they're just like, ah, everyone who's coming here has a computer science degree. This is what they learned.
Hmm.
We will quiz them on it. But also, I think it's kind of just a way to scale. And I don't know if it's the correct way to scale, but I think it is a way to scale to be just like, okay, well, if we're some giant large company like Amazon or Google or something, we want to be able to figure out if they know these skills, but these skills have to apply to a very large variety of teams because we don't know where they'll be placed once they get through our process. And so because it's such a wide variety of skills where they could be placed in the company, the most generic tech questions are very computer sciencey questions that can be applied to a bunch of
Hmm.
different technologies. So I feel like that is why. I could be totally wrong,
Right.
but those that's my guess.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. So a lot of like, at least some of that I've seen like use like a hacker rank, I think is the name, or stuff like that,
Hmm.
where it
Yeah,
can,
lead code and all
yeah, it
those.
can automate that. Do you think that's kind of a cop out mechanism where they just, okay, let's automate this first part of the process so we can cut down in like half all the people that we have to interview?
I don't know if it's a cop out
or a
necessarily, but
scaling
it
mechanism, if
is.
you want to call it that?
Yeah, I do think of it as a scaling mechanism. Like there's even startups just based here in Seattle that I've talked to where their entire company is just, we will interview candidates for you because we know how time
Hmm.
consuming it is.
For sure.
Like it just at Netlify, we have a few job postings that, hey, we've had a few job postings that have been listed, but just since posting those, we've had hundreds of people apply, and we have I think 3 or 4 people who are doing the interviewing, the recruiting, and then it has to go through the team and stuff. And so that's a lot of people to have to talk to, especially if you want to give them all a good chance and you want to be able to talk to as many of them as you can. And if you talk to 40 different people for a half hour, that's a very long week you've set up for yourself. And so you have to figure out some way to scale it. And I don't know what the best way to do it is there besides these kinds of automated things,
Hmm.
or hiring it out, or just being really, really picky about the resumes that come in. I think there's a lot that can be done with tech hiring, but I don't know how to solve it myself.
Yeah, it's a hard problem for sure. But so you also mentioned that you think one of the problem is people don't know how to communicate about like what they're doing. Do you think
Yeah.
your experience as a developer advocate helps there for yourself in your hiring process?
I think so. Yeah, and luckily I've always been kind of a chatty Cathy, so I've always been talkative and stuff. And so as a result, I think I've been able to figure out how to apply that to interviews relatively well. And I don't ace all my interviews, I definitely don't, but I interview at so many places that I'm able to have options if necessary. Like when I was graduating from college and interviewing at places, I had a lot of job offers. I did have 10 job offers, but it was because I interviewed at almost 100 places. Like it wasn't exactly like a perfect success rate. I just interviewed everywhere I
Is that
could.
something you
And
recommend,
I
like interviewing to a
I
lot of
think
places?
honestly yes, because you might not get your dream role, but there might be a company that you're just like, "Oh, this is a backup. I'll use it as a practice interview." And then you realize that they're actually a really great fit for you. That's happened to me a couple times where it's something that was kind of surprising and you're just like, "Oh, yeah, I could work for them. They seem great." And so I think it's great for keeping up your skills and also just finding jobs that you might not otherwise would have
Hmm.
considered.
Do you ever get mixed up in which interview you're having with which company? Like,
I take very active notes so that doesn't happen. Like for example, when the pandemic hit and I was interviewing, I took on many, many interviews and I just had a very big fat notebook where every single time I talked with someone, I was just writing everything down and,
right?
and making sure that I could follow up and send thank you notes to the right interviewers and being able to figure out, okay, where am I going to go after this?
That makes sense. I'm assuming it gets confusing.
Yes.
Yeah, so as part of your development or development advocate, I don't know, role.
Yeah.
So you said you spoke a lot of different places. So I was wondering, what's your experience with conferences? So is it something that you still enjoy having gone to a bunch?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love conferences. In terms of events I've spoken at, I used to keep like a log of all of them, but then there were too many. And this isn't even to brag. This is just to say I've spoken at a lot of events, probably more than someone needs to in their lifetime, probably close to 200 at this point.
that's a lot.
And it's a lot. And some of them, I've had some amazing experiences and some not so great experiences. And there have been times where I've burnt out hard because there was a period of time where I spoke 14 days in a row at a different event every single day. It was a bad choice, but I have learned to say no a little bit more. But yeah, I love speaking at conferences, and I do hope that they come back once the pandemic is done. Speaking at remote events, it's very fun, but it's definitely not the same.
Hmm.
Because you get to interact with people a little bit more. I'm not even a particularly extroverted person, but I love being able to have the hallway track, quote unquote, where
Hmm.
you get to talk with people in the hallway
Yeah.
in between talks and see what they thought about a given topic and learn from them and everything and meet new friends. I've made so many friends just from the hallway track where it's you casually interacting with people. And so I miss conferences. I think they're awesome, and I do hope that they come back in person someday.
Yeah, I do too. Having being an organizer of some, I think they're pretty cool. Um, Two things that they said there, and the first one I have to ask, because you said speaking at remote conferences is fun, and it's something that I don't relate to at all. I think that it's not fun because you're speaking to a monitor.
Is so Yeah, here's the very key difference. I want to be able to see the chat, so that way, like,
Right.
if people are talking during it, I can see what they're saying and alter if needed.
Hmm.
And I don't like pre-recording my
Right.
talks. That I hate it. I would much rather do something live like this,
Hmm.
because this is like a
Yeah.
conversation, and speaking and live streaming, that's kind of fun because you're interacting with people and it feels like you're doing it live on stage
Hmm.
almost. But if you do just a pre-recorded talk to a camera, that's not nearly as fun because it is just talking to a screen and it's not talking to a group. And then you have like that perfectionistic thing that comes in because you're
Yeah.
just like, oh well, since it's a recording, I have to make it perfect, and you just keep
Yeah.
recording it and
Right.
stuff. And there
Multiple
is a difference
takes,
there.
and yeah, it sucks. Yeah, the
Mhm.
second thing, I think you mentioned it briefly, but I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into what do you think makes for a good conference? You mentioned the hallway track, but is there any other indicators for a conference or event like meetup, but conferences that are usually a bit bigger? Like, what do you think are good indicators that it's a good one?
Yeah, I would say just tailoring to a lot of different people's interests. There have been some particularly awesome conferences that I've been to over the past year, pre-pandemic, where, for example, I was emceeing JSConf Hawaii, which it was in Hawaii, so
Good.
it was pretty great, but by itself. But the organizers did such a great job of having so many activities for everybody to get to know each other and interact. And so, yes, there was the actual speaking track, but they had very diverse speakers, and so it was from a very interesting lineup of people and very different talks. And also, they actually had a gap day in between the 2 days of talking. And in that gap day, they had canoe rides planned. They had just board game parties planned. They had luau's planned. They had tons and tons of different activities, so that way people could, depending on their interests, just talk with people more and interact with people more. And there's another one that I really liked, Dinosaur JS, which was last summer. And in that summer, it was particularly great because they again had a very diverse lineup, and so it was a lot of different people speaking, and they just had a lot of things to do. They said, okay, we're going to have lunch now. You can either eat in this designated indoor area where there's going to have stuff happening, or you can eat outside in this park. And they just had a lot of different
Hmm.
things that you could do. And like at the speaker event, they had us do woodworking actually, and we got to make ourselves like cutting boards and stuff. It was just a really cool, different event. And I love it when conferences have that unique twist so that way you can remember it a little bit more and interact with more people.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, one thing, kind of that, but getting more into you personally. So, as a developer advocate, I'm sure you get a lot of opportunities to speak that come through the company you're advocating for. But also, you mentioned at the beginning that you do funny videos online and stuff like that. Do you feel that like that personal branding sort of thing that you do have like your own personal brand right now, but is that something that you did consciously or is just kind of happened?
It kind of just happened. I did it for fun. Like the silly videos, I've actually been making videos for like over a decade, but I just hide them on YouTube because high school Cassidy was embarrassing. But I started making just the silly like TikTok style videos for Twitter and stuff. I started doing that a little bit over a year ago, and that was just because I thought it would be funny to make this one video, and I was just like, oh yeah, I'll get a few laughs on this one, and then a lot of people liked it and a lot of people were laughing at it, and I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. I like making people laugh. And truly I was just making them for myself, and I really like making them especially so I can show my parents and be just like, okay, let me explain this funny tech quirk. This is why my video is funny, and kind of
Yeah.
going through it with them because they so they can kind of understand the industry more. And the followers kind of happened. I'm glad that my personal public brand has kind of gotten to this place of the funny route, because that's something I think I've always enjoyed being able to do, making people laugh, but I've always just done very technical talks where I kind of try to be just fun on the side. And so the
Mhm.
fact that I can be a little bit more fun publicly and I've figured out an angle to do so is really fun for me.
And has it helped you like professionally so far? Do you think it will?
I don't know. I think that there's a few things that I do that I think have helped over time. For example,
Hmm.
my newsletter has gotten enough traction where I now write the Stack Overflow newsletter as well, because they liked my personal newsletter. They wanted me to bring a voice to the Stack Overflow newsletter. So that's kind of a fun thing where it's not necessarily a part of my career,
Hmm.
but a cool thing that I get to do now as a result. Um, I do think that some of the interviews I've gotten were definitely a result of people saying, "Hey, you're funny. You should join our team," and so hey, I'll take it. I do think it is good to have a personal brand. It's not for everybody. Some people just really don't like the concept, but I do think it has helped me enough get positions, and or not even positions, but interviews and interactions and demos and meetings that I've enjoyed, that I have found it to be really worth it to be public on the internet and vulnerable at times
Hmm.
with my learning experiences and things like that.
Cool. And as part of that, you also, as you said, you have your newsletter, but you also have a live stream, and you also have a
Mhm.
Patreon, right? So you have a
Yeah.
bunch of things going on. How did that happen? How did you get started with all those things?
Yeah, and so the live stream is something I have done on and off for a while, and I decided to do it more consistently during this quarantine. And that I just thought it'd be fun to not only be able to provide a space where people can ask a lot of questions, but also where I can code up a bit. And because I'm coding on stuff, my office is like, oh yeah, that's great. You can talk about Netlify a little bit.
Hmm.
And so it works out there. And for the Patreon, that was something that I thought it would be fun to create some kind of online community that is kind of spamless, because whenever someone pays even the minimum $2 to be able to join a Discord community or something, they're not there to just spew any kind of crap and then and then leave. Like they're coming to have a community, and everything else. It's me being able to provide a resource for the tech community. For example, I have resume reviews and interview prep meetings and stuff. It gave me a route to do that without just saying yes and no randomly to
Hmm.
people on the internet. It's a little bit more focused. And my Discord with Patreon is my favorite corner of the internet for sure. A grand majority of people are just, doing the $2 level so they can have access to the Discord,
Hmm.
and yeah, I love it. It's amazing. Everybody there is so friendly, and we talk about everything from code to cooking and all kinds of stuff in between, and it's very active. I actually have been seeing so many notifications pop up while I've been on this call. Um, and I love it. And that's something that I was just like, oh, this sounds like it might be something that's fun, and it's been more fun than I could have imagined. It's
Awesome.
such a great group.
And do you think
Mhm.
more people should do that, or is something that works for you might not be good for everyone?
Yeah, I think it works. I think it would work for a lot of people, or work as in it would be a great way to create a community if you're willing to be active and nurturing of that
Right.
community. Because there are so many people where they're just like, oh yeah, I'm going to make a subreddit, or I'm going to make a Discord channel, but then they never talk in it, and it ends up just being a dead channel. If you have a few key active people where you can talk with them
Hmm.
regularly, that's when a Discord or a Slack or a forum subreddit, something that's when it really gets very active, and you have something going. And if you're consistent about it, then you can have something awesome. If you're not consistent about it, then it just ends up being another thing that someone signed up for.
Got it. Okay, so transitioning from that a little bit, but keeping on the developer advocacy, because it's something like I know a few people doing it, but it's not something that I've done myself and not too familiar. But so
Sure.
a question that I have is, do you have any concerns ever that, or how do you work around the fact that you might not be working day to day, with the things that you want to advocate for. I'm sure you build demos, as you're saying, and stuff like that. But is there ever an issue where like you're presenting something and are not 100% confident that you know exactly how that's used, like in production and stuff like that?
Yeah. I personally don't, but I'm sure there are some DevRels out there who might, but I always make sure that I know how something works before
Hmm.
talking about it because I don't want someone to ask me something where I truly just can't answer and I end up flubbing it. Something that's unique about the Netlify team is we actually have a product team rotation where someone joins the product team to actually engineer on the product
Hmm.
for anywhere between a month and 3 months to get some tasks done, work on the product, see how it works, and then they come back to the team and explain it to us, say, okay, here's the stuff that's how it works, and then we can all write talks about it and blog posts and things, and then someone else goes on a rotation. And so that's something that's unique about our team that I think is really great. And what I know about a lot of DevRels, a grand majority of DevRels that I know is we kind of have we call it like a DevRel sandwich, where you'll be doing a DevRel role for a while, and then you're just like, okay, you know what? I'm tired of speaking. I'm tired of building demos. I just want to code.
Hmm.
And you go into an engineering role for a while. And then after doing that engineering role for a while, you get the itch again, and then you switch back to DevRel. And that's something that I have done, and that's something that a lot of people I know have done. And it's pretty common, so that way you can keep up your engineering chops because some DevRel teams are very, very technical. Like our team is very, very technical. I know like the Twilio team is very, very
Hmm.
technical. And so you don't have to worry about losing your coding chops because you have to code very regularly. And then there are some where it's much more community and speaking oriented, so much so that you don't get to code much at all. And so for some people, they would prefer to be able to switch to an engineering team or something and switch jobs to be able to build up that skills. And with some teams, they get all of the technical chops that they need. I haven't ever had trouble switching to a regular engineering job from a DevRel role.
Got it. Cool. Okay, so you said like you went to college and then had a few jobs after that, and
Mhm.
there's like a bunch of languages out there, and you ended up in JavaScript, and I wanted to ask
Yeah.
why.
Why? Because I don't like types. Just kidding. So when I started at Venmo in my first job out of college, I was actually doing Python and I was doing backend engineering there. And honestly, I just didn't really like backend engineering. I liked the idea of doing something more visual. And granted, I thought it was interesting because we did very test-driven development and it was all pairing and I was using Vim exclusively.
Hmm.
I still use Vim a lot, but I was very, very into that world. And then I realized that I kind of wanted to return to my first love of web development. And so while I was at Venmo, I kind of started to transition to the web team and do more JavaScript. And it was pretty early on with React too. I've been doing React ever since Venmo, so that's been 5 or 6 years now of doing React, which is
That
it's changed a lot.
that's forever
I've seen
in
the
front
dark.
end framework time.
I know it really is. I've seen the dark ages of React, and I'm hoping that we're coming towards the light with suspense and stuff coming out. But anyway, I ended up on JavaScript because I like web development. I think it's really fun to be able to make something that is very easy to put online and people get to just see and use. Because as cool as certain features were that I got to build at Venmo, like I built blocking, for example, so you can block people
Hmm.
from paying you or you paying them or whatever. It's it's cool and it's really interesting functionality, but I like being able to say, see this beautiful thing? I made that and pointing at that kind of stuff.
So you're not considering looking at other languages and or moving to back end stuff in the near future?
No, I mean, I do use other languages on occasion. Like, actually, one of the weird things in my brain whenever I do end up doing technical interviews, I almost always do them in Java, and that's just I don't know why. It's just how I am, I guess. I don't mind other languages. Like I think it'd be cool to learn Rust,
Hmm.
and I'll probably learn TypeScript at some point. I
Hmm.
just have been kind of avoiding it a little bit. There's a lot of languages that I do want to learn a little bit more deeply, and I know TypeScript is just on top of
Yeah, yeah.
JavaScript, so I won't get into that. But I'm most interested in web development, and I don't really see that changing much.
Cool. Um, do you think then, and we've talked about other languages, but do you think JavaScript is going to be the language that will rule them all in the end?
You know it will. I think I, there's some rule, and I forget the number, rule number, whatever, that if it can be written in
Yeah.
JavaScript, it will be. I think people are going all in on it, and it's fascinating for me to witness because as much as I like JavaScript, I don't think it's the perfect language. There's a lot of flaws that could be fixed in it, but it's a really low barrier to entry. If you can write JavaScript, you can build something pretty powerful pretty quickly just because
Yeah, I mean,
a lot of
it
things
kind
are
of
written in JavaScript.
snowballs, right? Yeah, it's like the
Right,
more JavaScript stuff you
exactly.
have, the easier it is to have more JavaScript stuff. It's,
Yeah, and so I apologize to those who hate JavaScript, but it's here to stay. And I'll be curious to see how people work with it more because things like Rust, things like WebAssembly, there's a lot of things, even like Elixir, there's a lot of things that are moving into the web space that aren't JavaScript,
mhm,
and I'll be curious to see how that morphs over time.
cool. Yeah, Elixir is a lot of what we do and talk about here, so it's cool you mentioned
Yeah.
that. Um, and yeah, you mentioned you've been on React for a while, and
Mhm.
so are you still on that bandwagon, or are you looking for what's next? Pun intended.
So, hey, I am doing a lot of Next.js, so there you
Yeah.
go. My job currently is doing a lot of React and Next.js and showing people how you can build certain things with the two of them. Um, I really like it. I think that there are better ways of doing things. Like Next.js, for example, I think it's a really cool framework, and they've done a lot of neat stuff with it. But I don't really like their router, for example. I
Hmm.
think that they could do some better stuff with that. And I know that there's a lot of hype around Remix coming out, which is a React. Well, it's kind of a React framework, but it's an agnostic framework that you can use React with or other frameworks and stuff.
Okay.
There's a few other things that I'm keeping my eye out for, but I really like that React changed web development so much. Like the virtual DOM was not a thing until React came along, and now Vue has it, and Vue has been doing a lot of really great things with it. And it's funny. My manager is Sarah Drasner, and she's on the Vue core team, and she's just like, Vue, we're all just really happy that people like to use this because we just kind of copy everyone. And it's a funny joke that's kind of true. I'm really open to other frameworks and stuff, but the mental model of React I think is one that's gonna stick around for a long time and that has affected web development forever. I think it's changed the way people the nobody writes like Backbone and jQuery anymore unless it's a legacy code base.
Hmm.
It's they start with something newer. And because of that mental model and because of how React does templating and even how React does hooks ever since those came out last year, I think it's very intuitive in my brain, and so I hope it's something that kind of stays trendy and that I can still get jobs doing. Um, but again, because it's affected web development so much, luckily, if there is a hot new framework that comes along that everyone uses, I think I'll be able to pick it up relatively quickly because chances are it took something from React.
Cool. And from what you're saying, there's something that popped to mind. I don't know if you're familiar with Rails and Rails, particularly Stimulus, the new hotness in
I've
Rails.
I've looked at it. I haven't done
Okay.
anything with it just because I haven't done Rails in years.
Yeah, but so basically, it doesn't have a templating like part of it. It hook like it has controllers that hook into the DOM and doesn't have a virtual DOM, and just like uses sprinkles, like just little sprinkles of JavaScript that hook into the DOM elements that have attributes, data attributes that it uses to do things.
Hmm.
And yeah, but I was just wondering your take generically in that, if you think um, all the frameworks will keep going that route of the virtual DOM and templating, or if there's a space for this lower impact in terms of JavaScript, like amount of code.
Yeah, and I think there's lots of different things to get into here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so first of all, I think with something like the virtual DOM, the point of that was to show that you don't have to do a full refresh of the page or a full repaint or anything when something changes.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you do it the virtual DOM way or some other day, that I think that's the important tidbit to pull out of that. If you can pull off page changes and stuff without doing a full repaint, you're doing much better than we were 7 years ago or whatever. Um, and I think there's there's a few other specific things like that where there's templating and putting too much JavaScript on the page and stuff where at Netlify we talk a lot about the Jamstack. That solves a lot of that because it's like statically generating a page so that way there's less server calls being run and then you query an API of some kind to query what is needed. Otherwise, there's no code that needs to run on the page. Like you don't need to run JavaScript to be able to navigate to this next one because it's all been generated already and it's just a CDN serving up the different pages. I see that growing a ton, and what we've seen at Netlify is it's something where people internally kind of invented the term, and it's kind of grown beyond the company itself, and people have written books on it and talks and courses on it and stuff. The philosophy behind it of being able to not run things so much, but to generate things and then run things as needed. I see that growing a lot more just for performance wise and everything, and even beyond SSR and server rendering pages, being able to have something static that is then hydrated with content later. I see that growing a ton, and I'm very excited to see where it goes from there.
Cool. Do you think that will take over this SPA for everything kind of
I
movement?
think it I think it will, and I think there's a place for SPA things, but especially for enterprise level types of people who are building much larger sites, SPAs are great, but they don't allow for SEO
Mm-hmm.
and browser crawling your pages as easily. Like browsers or search engines are getting better at that. They're figuring out how to run JavaScript on a page to be able to pull out important information, but uh, your SEO is really the huge thing. If you want anybody to see your website on the search engines or elsewhere, SPAs are kind of good at it. But if you want to change your head tag, for example, you have to run a lot of things to be able to do that because in an SPA, it's just one index.html document that's running the entire application rather than, for example, with SSG and static generating pages, you can have a bunch of different pages with their own SEO that's already been built while still putting in dynamic content and it not just being like a single marketing page or something.
Got it. And so you mentioned Next.js briefly, but where does that come into play? I haven't used it personally myself. I've read about it, but where do you think that comes into play here?
Yeah, Next is an interesting beast because it's a React framework that was originally all in on SSR and server-side rendering everything. And lately, especially as of I think 9.3 or so recently,
Mm-hmm.
they've been going a lot more in on SSG and statically generating stuff. Instead of getting initial props from a server from like a node server, it does get static props. Those are actual functions that they're converting to, so that way you can pull something that has already been built. And there's been some really interesting talks by the team behind it and by various people using it, talking about how yes, there's some elements that server rendering can really do that's cool. For example, they have this whole thing called incremental static regeneration. Lots of big
Mm-hmm.
words to basically say you want to build a site, but there are some routes you don't want to pre-build every single time, so you SSR them and then build them all individually rather than building the whole site in itself. And it's a really interesting concept. And I feel like this whole like Jamstack concept and SSR and stuff, a lot of it is going to be morphing and changing. I feel like we're in a very early stage of it now, but it's something that's going to be uh, it's going to be really interesting to see how it grows and how in some ways it feels like we're going backwards because like you could do this kind of static generation with Jekyll years ago,
Right.
but it's tools are more powerful now, And the fact that you're able to pull in APIs better, browser APIs natively support so many different things. Even CSS variables are more powerful now that you
Hmm.
can do dynamic theming without having to run JavaScript to do so. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that is coming into play, and I think that's where Next fits into it, and that's where a lot of other frameworks are doing interesting things like Gatsby
Hmm.
and Nuxt and even Scully for Angular. They're doing a lot of really interesting things for teams who still want to use Angular but want to take on the interesting practices like that.
Yeah, I came across Next. I think the first time I heard it was as an alternative to Gatsby,
Mhm.
which I don't know. It does too many complex things for me to build a static website. Like it has like why do you need GraphQL for that? But
Yeah.
in staying with Next, my question is, is Next good to build like a web application, not just your website that you want to do SSR on and all that stuff, but like a regular web app that has more interaction and stuff like that. Does it work
Yeah.
well for that?
Yeah, it's great for that. And I would even argue that Gatsby's great for that too in different ways. It's a whole different world there.
Hmm.
But yeah, Next has been great for that. And a lot of the stuff I've been building with it are smaller just to show like, hey, you can do this. But one of the things that I was thinking of, for example, one thing that's particularly interesting to me that I've been talking a lot more with my team about lately is the concept of gated content and being able to set up access control and everything.
Hmm.
Because without using JavaScript, you can set different role-based things with redirects and stuff. So that way, let's just say you're signing in from Portugal and I'm signing in from the United States. I could serve different content to you just from being able to set certain rules rather than running certain JavaScript to be able to do so. And I think there's a lot of power in that, not just geographically, but with all the different types of things that you can set to build really powerful applications. I was thinking about the concept of gamification with that, where let's just say we're doing some kind of tabletop game like Dungeons and Dragons or something.
Hmm.
We could have some application where you sign in, and based on what role you sign in with or permissions you've been given or whatever, you can have a full character sheet based on the character that you've chosen, and you can interact with each other and set up a WebSocket connection or something so that way you can chat with each other in the application, and you can make a full-on game where everybody has a different perspective, and a lot of it can be done via services and APIs and third-party databases where the actual site itself is just kind of laying the groundwork for it. And I think it's a really interesting like mind shift in how things can be distributed and more performant, but still just as powerful.
Yeah, definitely a different mental model for me in terms of web stuff.
Yeah, it's taken a bit for me to wrap my mind around it myself, but it's really intriguing, and I think there's a lot of cool stuff to be done with it.
Cool. Um, yeah, I don't know. Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to talk about? Any topic?
Oh, we've talked about so much. Let me think.
Talk more
I don't
about
think so.
can talk more about D&D if you want, but
I I actually haven't really played it, but I want
oh,
to
okay.
because it feels like something that would be very fun.
Yeah,
We recently we're getting into board game territory. We got the board game Gloomhaven.
yep.
Have you heard of that
Yeah,
one?
yeah, I own it.
Yeah, that. Oh, nice. Yeah, I. It's so huge. That box is like 20 pounds.
Yep.
It's massive. And we started like this whole campaign, and we were just like, okay, we're going to get all in on this. It's going to be so fun. And then the pandemic hit, and it was so sad. And our group very quickly dispersed, and we
Yeah.
haven't been able to pick it up again. But I like the idea of playing games like that. I think it's so fun. Because it's like playing a video game,
Hmm.
but with friends right in front of
Well,
you.
yeah, Gloomhaven, it's more tactical than Dungeons and Dragons. In Dungeons and Dragons, it's more has more of the personal aspect to it. That
Right.
I yeah,
Storytelling, character
well,
development. Yeah.
which we've only met today, but from the little bit that I know about you, I think you would fit very well into the sort of person that would like that type of game. Um,
Yeah. It seems fun.
for sure. if you can find someone to DM that's consistent and wants wants to do it, because that's the work actually
Yeah,
just for playing. That's it's just showing up.
yeah. Do you like any other board games and stuff? I recently played Wingspan
Yep,
and I really enjoy that one.
Wingspan is good. And if you play the
Yeah.
Europe expansion, board games is like,
Oh, I want to.
yeah, we would need another hour because I play a lot of board games. It's something that
Okay, tell me some of your favorites because I love talking board games.
Gloomhaven is really good. I like a lot of. We're getting completely off technical here, but I
Yeah.
love it. But I like a lot of war game types. So anytime you're battling
Mm.
people, so
Yeah.
I really enjoy right now. I got the Edge of Dawnfall. I don't know if you ever heard of that one.
I
But if
haven't.
you think so, that one you can only get through Kickstarter or now eBay. It's not even sold.
Oh, okay.
So,
Oh, good to know.
but I got that
But
one.
so many board games.
Yeah, but that one I really like, but it's huge. If you think Gloomhaven is big, like that, it's huge. Um,
Ooh,
but what other? Oh, Terraforming Mars is really good.
nice. I think my sister has that
Yeah,
one. I've heard really good things
yeah,
about
not
that
my
one.
style of game, but in that style, I really like it.
Hmm.
So that
Have you
one's,
played Scythe?
yes,
That's a
I
fun
don't.
one.
It's like my least favorite game. Um,
No, okay, never mind. Scythe sucks.
do you like it?
I've really liked Feast for Odin recently.
Okay, I've seen it played. I've never played it.
Have you played Agricola?
No, but yeah,
Okay.
but we have it here at the
Similar
office,
design.
but I haven't played it.
Yeah, they're longer games,
Hmm.
and it's all about like resource management and building
Yeah,
out the right farm and
exactly.
village or whatever. They get complex, but they're so fun.
Hmm.
I love those ones to just kind of optimize your every move to
Yeah,
crush people.
that is usually not really my type of game, but I played a
Mm.
bunch there. But I was thinking, what else in terms of longer games, themed longer games? Like I like War of the Ring a lot. If you like Lord of the
Oh,
Rings, it's like
I haven't
it's a 5 to 6
I
hour
haven't
game,
heard
so
it.
it's like you got have to set up for it. But it's basically the
Nice.
entire story of Lord of the Rings, and it's one or two players play the bad guys, and one or two players play the
Mhm.
Fellowship and all of the good factions. And it's a war game, like you're battling everyone, and while like in parallel, the Fellowship is trying to get the ring to Mordor, like, and that's
That's so fun.
yeah.
That sounds great. We all of a sudden got a bunch of chatter on Twitch of people talking
I'm
about board
sure.
games now. I love it.
Uh,
Oh, Pandemic Legacy. I want to play Pandemic Legacy, but you know, probably should get through the real pandemic first.
yeah, actually, is one of the classics that I haven't played a lot. Um,
Yeah, I've played the original
mhm.
Pandemic, but not the Legacy one.
But I mean, this board games in general is good to get into. I think it's I don't know,
Yeah.
it's a big hobby of mine. Starting it, although in Portuguese, but if you say you understand, we were starting or trying to start a YouTube channel on board games here, like people at Subvisual, some people at Subvisual. Um,
Nice.
so yeah, and I don't know, maybe starting some conferences. We'll see what happens. But that's actually a thing that is bad about the community here in Europe. I think there's a lot less board game communities and conferences than there are in the US. I
Mhm.
don't know
Yeah,
why.
no, there's a ton. Even in Canada, even they have giant board game conventions there
Hmm.
too.
Is PAX is in Seattle, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, PAX is in Seattle.
Okay. I went to PAX Unplugged
Yeah,
last
which is
year in Philly.
oh nice.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we're
Kind of went off on a tangent there, but it was so
completely.
fun.
No, yeah,
Love
yeah.
talking about the games.
Yeah, for sure. Like, any games are cool. I don't know. Board Game Geek is probably the best place to see like about games and have a more generic
Yeah.
idea. I usually just go there not just for the rank they have, but also one thing that I think that they have much better than anything else is how many players it plays well with. Um, you can check it
Hmm.
out there, and that really helps sometimes. Like we were playing Terraforming Mars 2 days ago, and we were like, there was just two of us, and we're like, oh, does it even play with two well? Because publishers will always say it does, And so, but yeah, we checked it out. Oh, it does, and we played it, and it was super fun, even with two people. So it's
Yeah. The board game subreddit is really good for that too.
mm,
Like there have been times where I'll see like for Wingspan, for example,
mm,
they'll say, "Hey, you should take out these cards and do this, this, and this," and then you can add one more player
mm,
and stuff like that. And I'm
cool.
grateful to the board game
And yeah,
community for stuff like that.
before we go, then if we're talking board games, I'm gonna plug a Portuguese one, which is
Ooh.
it's marketed like now pretty much everywhere as City of Spies. The original name was Estoril, which is the like where it's based on. The expansion is not very good, but the base game is a pretty solid game, and it's a Portuguese one, so and it's fun.
Cool.
Yeah, you play spies against other people, and you know like you're trying to kill each other, kind of to get more spies to reach the objectives. It's one of the
Nice.
few good, I think, very solid Portuguese made games. There's a few good Portuguese based games like Azul. I don't know if you've played
Yeah, I
on.
love
Yeah,
Azul. Azul's
so
great.
that's based on the Portuguese stylings, Portuguese styles called Azulejos. So that's one. Lisboa. There's a few Portuguese based games,
Mhm.
but that's the one Portuguese made. Like the developers are Portuguese.
Nice. I'll check it out.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. No. Thanks for being here. It was awesome talking to you. And yeah, thanks for accepting this challenge. It was great.
Of course, it was great chatting.
See ya.
See
Um,
you.
Okay, just to wrap up, everyone, thanks for sticking around for this board game talk. But if you're interested in this and any of the other topics that we talked about, don't forget to follow us on all social media so that you get warned about the next editions of Subvisual Live Talks. See you.